Okay, I think some more people are still going to trickle in, but we can go ahead and get started because we have a lot of great content to cover today, and we want to make sure we hit it all. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Excited to connect with you. I'm Holly. I'm on the operations team at Modern Health. I've connected with many of you over email. Maybe I've spoken on the phone to you as well. It's exciting how we've had such a growing network of wonderful providers to partner with, and we really appreciate all that you guys do, especially during this pretty crazy time we're experiencing. And in light of this crazy time, I know many folks are switching over to teletherapy either entirely, whether you were doing some teletherapy before or you're new to it now. In light of recent times, we wanted to just highlight best practices around teletherapy to help you in your practice as you make that transition. So with that in mind, Erika Simon, one of our wonderful Modern Health providers, is here today to talk about best practices in teletherapy. She's been offering teletherapy for quite a long time now. We were actually just joking, she just opened her new in-person office right before this all happened, but before that she was doing teletherapy only. So kind of ironic timing, but she'll help share kind of the move in the other direction with you guys today. And before I turn it over to Erika, I do want to note that everybody is currently on mute automatically. We want to encourage participation. So in the chat and the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom meeting, please feel free to ask questions throughout. I'll be monitoring that and either answering questions over text or sharing some with Erika to share with the group. So please do participate. And we're excited to get started. So Erika, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Holly. So my name is Erika, and I am a Modern Health provider. I have specialties in adjustment, anxiety, stress, PTSD, and health-related concerns. Then I'm also trained in evidence-based techniques, CBT and ACT, and emotion-focused therapy. And then as Holly mentioned, I have years of experience with providing teletherapy. So if you have questions, definitely chime in and we'll get going. So what we'll be talking about, we'll be going over legal considerations, technology considerations, preparing for your sessions, how teletherapy can impact or influence the Therapeutic Alliance, informed consent, risk and benefits of teletherapy, and then safety planning. So I think it's really important to just remember that teletherapy is simply providing care within a virtual environment. It's an environment that you're providing the care that you usually do. So all your training, your knowledge, your professional judgment still applies. I think it's really easy for providers, and I've heard this from a number of my colleagues, that it can feel like this is like a whole new world, but really you're preparing for a new environment and then tapping into your clinical judgment as you navigate therapy. So first of all, there are legal considerations. These are a little bit different right now because of the COVID crisis that we're dealing with. So what we'll talk about first is what you need to know just in general about teletherapy, and then we'll talk about how the COVID virus is impacting it. So you want to make sure that you have the proper licensure in the jurisdiction in which you live and which your client is located. So usually there are limitations around providing care only when your client is in the state that you're in, that you're licensed in. You need to know the state's laws and regulations as they vary from state to state. There are some states around the country that do have teletherapy practice guidelines in place for allowing you to, say, see your client if they are traveling, for example. And then you want to make sure that the standard of care that you deliver via video is equivalent to your in-person care for the scope of practice that you're providing. So in this particular moment in time, because of the COVID virus, there has been a lifting of the restrictions around providing teletherapy across state lines. We don't know how long that's going to be for, or if that will, how that will change once the crisis has passed, but it is just important to note that. So technology is a really important part of preparing for providing teletherapy. The first thing is deciding on a platform. At this moment in time, HIPAA is actually reducing their restrictions around requiring you to have a HIPAA compliant platform. So if you're really struggling and you need to provide care and you're not quite up and running yet, they're allowing for the use of non-compliant platforms. However, it's not that hard to get the compliant platform set up. You can choose a video platform that for example, Zoom or Doxy, they're extremely easy to sign up for and get going without really setting up almost anything. Simple Practice is a fantastic platform that helps you do everything electronically, including all of your forms, your intakes, etc., and your notes. And then there's Theranest has also been recommended. And then you'll need to sign a business associate agreement, so a BAA. For some platforms, it's sort of just rolled into the signing up process. For others, you have to do an extra step, like with Doxy, they do require an extra step to do it, but it's a part of the fee that you pay. And then Zoom has an additional fee on top of their regular fee. I think it's like $200 to set up the business agreement. It takes not that long, and then you would just be fully compliant. So, however, if you are finding that you're having technical difficulties or one of these platforms that are HIPAA compliant are down, since there are extra layers of security that maintain compliance with HIPAA, if you're experiencing technical difficulties, use what you have to give your clients the care that they need. The second thing is you want to know how you're going to share documents. So determining how and when you're going to share documents with your clients ahead of time and then discussing with them is really important. Some of these platforms have ways of being able to share documents very easily. Again, Simple Practice is the one that I use. I use Simple Practice plus Doxy, and Simple Practice allows you to securely send any kind of forms that you would like, receive forms from your clients, secure messaging, etc. So, but just having that plan and knowing how you're going to do it is important. Now, everybody worries about technical difficulties, and you will have technical difficulties. There's no two ways around that. You just have to accept this and then discuss this directly with your client at the beginning of therapy. You want to normalize the tech issues and then just be calm when they come up. Have your plan, be calm. This really helps to not make a big deal out of the technical piece. And then having a plan that is clear and consistent. So when you encounter difficulties, you'll want to know ahead of time how long you'll try to reconnect via video, and then who will call whom on what number after a certain amount of time, and then discuss this with your client at the onset of therapy. So they're very well aware of exactly what the protocol is. You don't want to be scrambling in the moment, trying to figure out, where's the number, who do I call, are they calling me, etc. For troubleshooting, it's really important to get to know your platform. Take the time to go into the platform, see what the different settings are, familiarize yourself with the ways that you can connect or reconnect, what kind of, is it standard definition? Can you change the definition of how clear the picture is? You really want to just have a very thorough understanding as best as you can of your platform, because then when problems do arise, because they will, you can just troubleshoot in the moment. Your anxiety will not spike to the same degree when you are experiencing difficulties, and this will also help the client remain calm. So general technical considerations. It's really important to only connect via secure networks such as password protected and encrypted Wi-Fi. Do not use public Wi-Fi or public computers. Restart your computer every 1 to 2 days so it runs efficiently. Keeping your software up to date and only from reputable sources such as Microsoft or Apple. And then if possible, use a wired Ethernet connection instead of Wi-Fi because it generally is more stable if this is possible. You also want to ensure that you have upload and download speeds of at least 10 megabits per second, but optimally 35 megabits per second. You can check this using any kind of speed test. Pretty much every carrier internet provider has their own version of speed tests, or there are general speed tests that you can use as well. So you want to prepare your space for your sessions. You want to prepare as best as you can to create an environment that is conducive to therapy. So you want to optimize it. You want to make sure that you're in a private place that's quiet, that's well lit, that's with good acoustics so that you don't have strange reverberations from the speaker. You want to also optimize your camera placement. So it's important to maintain as best as you can eye contact with your client. So you want to position where you see them in relation to where your camera is so that you can maintain eye contact as best as possible. You don't want to be looking at, you know, an image of them down at the bottom of your screen, because that's not going to convey that warmth that you normally would at an in-person interaction. You also want to prepare your props. So some people have found, you know, great ways of, you know, when they use whiteboards, of placing that behind them and facilitating that process. Some people use, you know, you can transition to using paper and your pen and just kind of holding things up. But what you want to do is you want to practice this and try this out before you begin, because especially with lighting, depending how the lighting is, if you're holding something up, it could be either easy to see or hard to see. If you have a whiteboard behind you, there can be a glare. So you really want to figure out what props you use, how you can implement them in your sessions with clients, and then if you need to make any adjustments. You also want to just in general reduce clutter. So you want to make the space behind you feel really inviting. It's nice to have, depending on, you know, what location that you're in, you want to essentially kind of recreate a feeling of you know, you within the context of a therapeutic session.
Erika, we did have one question come in regards to the last slide around technical considerations. What's the best way to set up your client for success in that regard? They won't necessarily like have an Ethernet cable, but of course the connection's only going to be as good as their Wi-Fi is as well. So how do you set expectations with the client around that?
That is a great question. So you can really go through, and when you're working with your clients, you know, I always do an introductory 20-minute consultation phone call with all of my clients. Not everybody does that, but I always, you know, ask them to, you know, please set themselves up for success, and to, you know, make sure that they have a secure connection and that they can connect and do some of these tests if they think that they might not have a good connection. And then for the first session, I let them know, you know, there's always a little bit of just kind of getting up and running, and to expect that, and that's okay. And then if I'm noticing that there's any glitches or, you know, lags, then, you know, help troubleshooting in the moment with them, using these exact same, you know, you don't necessarily have to say, is your software up to date? But, you know, making sure that they're as close to the router as possible. Can they run a speed test if you're really struggling? Have they, you know, can they restart their computer? And then asking them how you're coming through on their side as well. So the upload speeds really will impact how you come across to them. So you want to just directly ask them, you know, how am I coming through? Can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay? Any other questions about that particular?
I think that helps address it. Everyone feel free to continue asking questions, either the Q&A or in the chat down below. We'll continue to pepper in some of those questions. Actually, there was one other one that came up in terms of the inviting environment behind you. I'm probably a bad example. I have like my bike behind me, so this is not the best therapeutic environment. Can you give some more specific examples of like what is typically behind you during a therapy session?
So I try and keep everything as really as neutral as possible, and focus on, you know, I wear neutral clothes. I try and minimize anything behind me, because I don't really have a space that I can look, quote unquote, can look like a therapy office. So that's how I handle that for me. If I had the ability to make it look a little bit more officey, I would totally do that. You just want to just look at it through the lens of what the client would see, because they're also seeing you sort of this head detached from your environment in a way. So the more you can recreate something that feels like an office, the better. But if you don't have that option, then keeping a nice neutral background is optimal. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I did a comment come up. Are we good?
We do have one more. We got a question. How do you address lag and other technical difficulties for those using cell phones? I work with many who have internet access through their cell phone.
That's a great question. So the lags, just to some degree, you have to just get really good and accepting of the fact that there will be lags. And I think the more that you can just accept it, acknowledge it, normalize it with your client, and have a backup plan, the better. And we'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit further down, but there are ways to just kind of acknowledge the how to prepare for and cope with lags. So that'll be on a slide in just a little bit.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for pre-session prep, it's really important to set yourself up for the most success, to always check your technology before a session. You don't want to be rushing at the last minute. So it will save you so much headache, hassle, and stress if you just spend 10 minutes or more, just checking everything with your technology. So restart your computer if you haven't within the last 1 or 2 days. It can really be a good, just best practice to just get in the habit of restarting your computer every day. This will save you so much hassle. Also closing any unnecessary programs, application, browser tabs. The more that your computer is doing, the more it's going to be taking away bandwidth from your video call. So this is where you literally need to go through, I close every single window that I normally have open. I close, so I just have the one window with my video call and my email. So just in case there's like an issue, I'll have that tab with their, like if we need to quickly, or if they're trying to email me, because that does happen. They'll be, trying to email you to ask a question if they're struggling. So that's all I have open. And then I just close everything else down, and you want to do a hard close on all your unnecessary programs. So just clicking the little X box isn't going to completely close the program. I am an Apple person, and so you have to go to the dock and really close down the application completely. And if you aren't sure of how to do that, there's lots of resources for knowing how to do that. And then you want to use a pre-call check tool to check your connection before each session. So this is, for example, one that Modern Health uses, and it's really great because it can tell you how good the audio quality is, how good the video quality is, and of course, if you want to run a speed check, that's always a wise idea as well. So you also want to pay attention not just to your setting, but understanding what your client's setting is. So again, since you're not having people come in to see you in person, you have to really think about the setting as being the sum total of where you're at and where your client's at. So it's important to know your client's regular location. Most clients, in my experience, routinely join from 1 or 2 places, whether it's home or work. So asking your client about the physical location where they will usually attend their sessions is really important, and having that knowledge handy. If they're somewhere temporary, just knowing the city that they're in is plenty. You want to document. So in the beginning of every session, you want to establish where they are and then document that in your session note. It takes just a couple seconds. And you want to optimize privacy. So a lot of clients won't necessarily have thought about this ahead of time. And I've had clients who joined from all sorts of situations that I was a little bit surprised by. So just really making sure that you encourage them to join from a private place where they're unlikely to be disturbed, where they're not going to have kids running through. I know right now we're in kind of a strange time because of COVID. So, it can be more difficult to optimize privacy. I've had clients join from their car, for example, depending on what the issues were and if they didn't have a room that they could go to and close the door. So you do have to get a little creative sometimes, but you do still want to optimize privacy as best as you can. And then you want to reduce distractions for them. So again, clients can have all sorts of things going on their end, and we're not necessarily can we see what those things are. But some of the basics are, making sure that they turn off their screen notifications, any computer sounds, because as those kind of come being in, especially Slack, Slack is a really big, important thing to consider, because a lot of clients will have their Slack channels sitting up there, and you really want to make sure that they just completely close out of that, and they're not being distracted by that little ping. Because even if they're not checking their Slack, just the pinging noise can disrupt the therapeutic process. When it comes to the Therapeutic Alliance, this is going to take a little bit more time to create than it would in person, but it's totally doable. I was totally surprised when I first started doing teletherapy after I left my postdoc and I've been doing all of my therapy in person. It felt just this really odd thing to imagine not being in the room with a client. And in fact, for me, I use a lot of nonverbals, how I'm sitting in my chair, how I'm leaning in. I use my body a lot in session to try and convey warmth and empathy and that I'm listening. So I personally was very concerned when I first started doing teletherapy. I was like, how is this going to work? And I have been surprised that it really is totally possible to do all the things that you normally do. It just takes a little bit more effort and a little bit more thoughtfulness. So humanizing yourself. When clients come into your office, they're taking cues from the environment about who you are and who they're interacting with. But when you're just this head on a screen, it's a lot harder for them to get that. So paying extra attention, especially at the beginning of therapy, to connect with your clients, to humanize yourself, have a little bit more of the chit chat that maybe you otherwise might not do normally, but helping them get a sense of who you are. You don't have to go into any detail, like personal details about yourself necessarily. You want to keep the focus on them, but I found that they're much more likely to just have a little bit in the beginning of wanting to say, how are you? How's your week going? And having a little bit more than what I've found has been the case for in-person therapy. So providing consistency. You want to try to be in the same office each time to give a client a sense of continuity. Again, they're going to be trying to understand who you are and the context that you're in, but they don't have that understanding of the context you're in. If you are in an office, you can even kind of tilt your computer a little bit and give them a sense of what your office looks like. Little tiny details like that can actually make a big difference. But you do want to be in the same office as best as you can and not be moving around, because they're going to be wondering, oh, what's going on? Where are you? It can kind of be a little bit of a distraction for them. And then if you do go somewhere, because people travel, just letting them know, I'm out of my usual office today, and I'm on travel. That just helps to lessen some of the anxiety they might feel about seeing you outside of your context. And then be aware of the impact of technology on communication. So speaking to the audio lags can and do occur. It's important if you're starting to notice that things are lagging quite a bit and that there's been a change. You can start, try restarting the video platform or restarting the session. I find sometimes just restarting a session is plenty. And then you want to slow down your speech, give plenty of pauses, and minimize unnecessary hand movement. So when you're doing things like this in front of the screen, especially when you're using a HIPAA compliant platform and there are lags, that's going to be super distracting to your client. So minimize as best as possible, and then just slowing speech down more than you might usually do, especially if you have a client that has a little bit more lag than others, and then making lots of space for pauses. So the informed consent process. In addition to your standard informed consent, you'll want to include the following. So first, that research has demonstrated that it's as effective as in-person therapy. There's really a growing body of literature. The risks and benefits of therapy via video, the safety protocol that's in place that you'll need to comply with and that they'll need to follow, how you will handle technical difficulties, and then your termination policy and how it might differ depending on if they're being seen virtually or in the office. So highlighting the benefits and discussing the risks. So there are lots of benefits of teletherapy. So this increases access to care, provides client a lot of convenience. They don't have to drive. It saves them a lot of time. It can help them with not having to figure out extra childcare costs or taking away time from employment more than they would otherwise. You can accommodate special needs a lot of the time, and it just overall reduces barriers to treatment. That said, there are risks involved, and the two big ones are information security and emergency management. So you want to discuss these with your client, as well as the measures you're taking to mitigate those risks, such as using HIPAA-compliant video platforms and then how you're storing your records. So really helping them understand that these are risks that are involved, and that they need to be aware of, and they have to choose to be okay with, and then what you're doing to keep them safe. And then you want to document this in your first note for your first session, that you discuss this with your client. So teletherapy really works. The VA has been using teletherapy for over 30 years with veterans across the country and in rural areas. So it's really reaching a lot of people who otherwise would have never, ever been able to access care. And it's with a population of a particularly, high need population, where a lot of times they're struggling with very difficult needs that are clinically significant around PTSD and whatnot. So it works with veterans, and it can work with your clients too. So your civilian clients. And there's such a growing body of literature that it shows it can be effective in a lot of different ways with a lot of different issues. It's not that you can only do it with your lower needs clients. It can be used with people with all sorts of presenting problems. It can be used with more intensive therapies like PE, and it can actually increase compliance and satisfaction on the part of the client, because it eliminates so many barriers to care. So some of the things that can just come up, that when they are coming up, it can feel like an eek moment if you don't address them ahead of time. So it's possible just to eliminate them by building into your intake process some of these reminders. So they really cannot be driving while they're conducting a teletherapy session. They really need to be someplace that is stable and where they're sitting and not actually in sort of any kind of moving vehicle. You can't provide them therapy while they're on the bus. You also want to indicate that they have to abstain from drinking alcohol or using drugs during a session. It's a little less likely that this comes up when clients are coming into care, but we know that they still do come up. But it's also much more likely when you're dealing with a session where somebody's at home. They might be more likely to feel like they can drink a glass of wine, for example. So just addressing that on the onset can really be helpful and prevent some awkward situations. And then indicating they can't record the sessions without your permission. Safety planning for emergencies is absolutely imperative. Absolutely need to have a very clear, well-defined safety planning plan. And it's, there are rare instances of true mental health and medical emergencies that can come up. They are rare in my experience and in a lot of teletherapists' experiences, but you still need to make sure that you're prepared. The last thing you want to be doing is trying to cope with an emergency without being well prepared ahead of time. Lots of things can go awry if you don't have a plan, and things can go very smoothly if you do have a plan. So as a note, it's important to always have your phone and your safety plan with you and handy when you're in a session. You don't want to be running to the other room to get your phone. You want to be able to maintain your video session with your client and just have your phone to pick up, and then have your safety plan someplace where you can just pick it up, go through it, and do the proper precautions and protocol. A well thought out and thorough safety protocol will include, in addition to the normal things that you do for safety protocols, you want to have your client's usual address. You want to have an emergency contact person with their phone number. It's really important to have one specifically for emergencies, and not to have an email. What I noticed is that a lot of clients were providing email addresses and not phone numbers when I first began. And I was very glad that I had an extra in-session safety protocol that the clients had to fill out, to where I would have a phone number as well. You want an outline of what you are expected to do and how, and you want to have your script for how you're going to discuss these safety issues and expectations with your client, both at the onset and then when you're in the emergency, should one come up. You want to know how to talk with these issues with your client, remaining calm, and as we know, dealing with emergencies can just feel they can be stressful for us as well. So the more that you can plan for at the onset, the less likely you're going to feel really stressed in the moment. You want to have your risk monitoring procedures as usual, and then referral and escalation procedures, what you're going to do and when. So there's some final thoughts here before we open up for questions. You want to apply the same ethical and professional standards of care and professional practice that you already do when you provide in-person care. Again, this doesn't go out the window. You have a lot of clinical intuition and wisdom that all comes to bear on how to work within the context of teletherapy. You want to do the right thing by your clients. You want to give them the care that they need, especially in these unique times. A lot of restrictions and regulations are being changed to allow for us to just deal with this crisis, give our clients what they need in the moment. If you need to talk with the person on the phone, you talk with the person on the phone. If you need to switch to a non-HIPAA compliant platform because it's going to be more stable, then you do it. Just do what you need to first do no harm and really give the care that you know the person needs in the moment. You know, and tapping into your clinical knowledge and skill set, just like you would with in-person care. Again, I think a lot of times we just feel like things are going to be different with teletherapy, and you'll really start to notice that you'll be able to do the exact same skills and manualized therapies and, you know, treatment protocols. You'll be able to do those things just as well with teletherapy. And then consult frequently when you're unsure. In fact, it can be helpful just to consult frequently. We're all in this together. We all have the same questions and concerns. We're dealing, you know, and grappling with the same kinds of problems with bandwidth. Right now, teletherapy, since everybody's going to it, there's, you know, bandwidth issues that we have to struggle with. Just reach out to have trusted colleagues to talk to, know the resources, reach out to Modern Health to ask questions. You're not in this alone. And asking the questions and consulting with trusted people is a good idea. So I'm seeing that some questions are popping up, so I will pause there and see what we have, Holly.
Yes, quite a few questions, and thank you guys for submitting, and thank you, Erika. That was very informative and helpful to even me, who is not a provider. One question that came up that I'll quickly address is if you can get continuing education units for this event. We're actually not set up for that yet at Modern Health, but that's something that's coming soon. All these sessions are just voluntary and meant to help you out, but we'll keep you guys posted on any updates there because it's something we definitely want to offer our providers. A question came up from Pamela. Hello, Pamela in Nashville. She asked if you could speak a little more around the current restrictions regarding providing teletherapy across state lines, and if it applies at a national level. I know we have some international folks on the line as well.
International. So yes, I am less familiar with international. I think you have to figure out like what's your country's, what is their response to providing mental health. I think every country is kind of struggling to figure that out. For the US, yeah. Pardon me? Oh, sorry. For the US, there are guidelines and we can send those out so that you can read about further. There's several links that will be very useful and are updated as things progress and how things change. So again, I think right now the big understanding is people are in crisis. This is a stressful time. People are having to shelter in place. We have a limitation on how many providers that we have to provide care, and so it's first do no harm, and how do we take care of the mental health needs that people have. So I think that's kind of the fundamental basis at this point that a lot of why the restrictions are lifting to address the growing need, and then referring back to this the resource that we can send out regularly.
Awesome. And I will note that at this time, Modern Health is not offering referrals across state lines simply because we have enough providers across various states. And we don't know how long this lack of restriction will last for, and we want there to be continued care. So we're not providing referrals until if we reach a point where we're in a really major need and there's a specific specialty, we might start doing that. But it's unlikely just because we're prioritizing continuity of care and we're lucky to have a robust network across the states. Awesome. A couple of folks are asking for links. I'll be sending out a copy of this deck as well as the recording within the coming couple of days. So you'll have access to that and those other resources that Erika mentioned about the updates across teletherapy restrictions and state lines. I'll be sure to send those out as well. One question that came up is that she's heard from colleagues or that over teletherapy you can tend to sound a little bit echoey and maybe even harsher, and she's concerned about coming off that way. Any advice on how that could be mitigated?
Sure. So this is the kind of thing that with strategic planning, you can pretty much eliminate most, if not all of these issues. I mean, there are some issues like if your client has a poor connection, that's just, you can't help with that. But I really highly recommend whatever platform you are going to use to get a trusted colleague or a friend or a family member and actually test it out and see, there's a lot of things that can impact. So, what room you're in, what kind of microphone you're using. There are lots of different aspects of the teletherapy platform that you're using that you can optimize to reduce that. I have not personally found that that has been my experience, but I also tested it and just made sure that I was coming across on the other end as I usually would. So I just highly recommend testing and troubleshooting until you have as optimal of an environment as possible.
Awesome. Thank you. There was another question around using a headset and thoughts on how professional that is as well, especially if you're trying to mitigate echoing and other noise.
That's a great question. So this is one where you're going to have to figure out how is the client best served. So I do think it's optimal to try and avoid wearing a headset if at all possible, because it is a thing. It changes the way you look. It can be a little distracting. And that being said, if it increases the quality of the connection that you can make and how well you can convey warmth and empathy, then that can be a judgment call on deciding, well, I'm going to prioritize the empathy and connection over maybe having something on my head. And if you can use earbuds, that's another option, like AirPods or the wireless ones. That's another way that you can basically straddle that line for improving the sound while also still giving your client a feeling of you as a person without that extra piece.
Awesome, really helpful. Another question that came in privately was some clients who might be working with you in person right now, as you're making the shift to teletherapy, they might be a little bit nervous about switching from in-person to teletherapy, but they could potentially really benefit from continuing to work with you as a provider. What would you recommend to help clients start to feel comfortable with making that transition?
That is a great question. So I think there are a few things to do. The first thing is really telling your client that it's equally as effective. They're going to be getting the same level of effectiveness of the care that they're currently getting, plus you're letting them know all the things that they're going to be getting. Increased convenience, for example, can be useful. I also think it can be useful to relate it to something they probably are more familiar with, like, for example, just saying, really, it's just like FaceTime, only with some extra layers of security. Relating it to something that they're familiar with, that, even for some people who are older adults who are kind of fearful of technology, all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's like when I FaceTime with my grandkids. That can really ameliorate a lot of that anxiety as well. And then I always just say, hey, let's give this a try. If it's important to you to continue care, we're right in the middle of therapy. Let's just try 1 or 2 sessions and we'll touch base and see how it's going. And then we'll go from there. And sometimes just letting them know and having that space to say, I'm going to try it out. And if I don't like it, I don't have to do it. And we'll figure out another plan, is normally plenty to get people to be willing to make the leap.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry, a bunch of questions were coming through and I was listening to your answer. A couple of questions about just general modern health referrals and stuff. You can look at our policies and procedures for those questions or email provider@joinmodernhealth.com. We're going to keep this webinar focused on just teletherapy right now. Let's see. Let's see. As I'm looking through these questions, is there anything else that you wanted to add, Erica?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, these are great questions. You know, I've been really surprised. I had a lot of apprehension with teletherapy when I was first starting to get going with it. And I've been amazed at how well clients really love it. I had a number of clients who said, oh, I don't really know. And every single one of them stayed in therapy. So I haven't had any drops from doing teletherapy. And I check in regularly. How is this going? How is this feeling? How are you, what do you feel about the platform in general? I think it's really good just to have direct, open conversations with your clients. A lot of times we don't want to do that because of our own anxieties, but addressing them head on, giving them the space to talk about it, and making sure that they know that they're empowered, that at any point they're not finding it useful or they'd like to switch, to please just be direct and open with you about it. Give them that freedom and power that can help us well.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question that came in, and this is actually one I have a question about when I'm on like conference calls, is where do you look? Are you looking at like the green light on your screen, or where do you tend to look? Because it's easy to get distracted because you're looking at.
Right. So I set up pretty much what I do. So there's two ways you can do this. You can have the big screen where it's like the whole screen is the person. If you're doing that, you really need to be sitting further back for it to look like you're looking at your clients. For me, depending on what's going on, where I'm at, I will actually have a smaller view, and I put the client, the video right at the top of my screen, right by my camera, so that I can, as best as I can, look like have that looking at them, and they can feel that connection with me. It is a little weird to be just staring at the green light, because then it's hard to see what the client is doing and the nonverbals. So that's what you want to balance. You want the picture to be as high as possible and in line.
Perfect. One other logistical question that came in is, for the initial paperwork with consent forms, do you typically have them signed digitally, or do you ever do like just snail mail?
I do everything digitally. Simple Practice is fantastic for this. I do, even though I use Doxy and sometimes Zoom if necessary. That's the other thing too, is you can have different, like having a backup platform that is HIPAA compliant can also be useful. But I do all of my forms online with Simple Practice. They have you a lot of form templates that are already in there that you can customize. You can create your own forms. You can create your own assessments. You can do lots of things to have everything be electronic. And then they just digitally sign it. You sign them up for their session, and then Simple Practice, which will just send a link to the client portal where they can log in, and they can get access to all of the client forms. And as they get completed, they'll start showing up that they are completed, and then you'll get a notification when they've completed everything.
Awesome, great. Another question that came up was, what limitations do you run into in doing exposure therapy, and how do you navigate that? Are there any limitations with different therapeutic modalities that you would do in person?
That's a great question. So when I do in-person therapy, I definitely do more likely to go somewhere with a client to do some exposure exercises. So you do have to get creative, and I've still been able to navigate that and do exposure exercises just fine. If there's a way to accompany the person when they're on their phone, because if you would be walking with them anyway to do an exposure exercise, there are ways to support them, because the platforms can be on their phones. I think you want to use your clinical judgment as you would in the in-person to maintain confidentiality and all the things you would usually do. But there are ways to either be with the client while they're doing something that way, or just doing something when they're at their house. And then assigning independent in vivo exercises as you normally would.
Great, thank you. A couple other logistical questions. There was one question about a preference between using phone or computer. I'm not sure if that was meant for video specifically. I would imagine computer is ideal for better bandwidth. But even maybe could you speak to doing phone therapy versus video therapy, if you have any thoughts on that?
So yes, if you can be on a computer, that's the best with an Ethernet cable. That's optimal. If you need to, I have switched over to my phone because right as we were switching over to everybody doing teletherapy, the bandwidth drastically reduced, and I was having a lot more technical issues at that exact moment. So I did switch over to using the Simple Practice online app through my phone a couple times. That seems to have lessened recently, so I'm back to just using my computer. I think when you're providing care, seeing each other is best, picking up on that nonverbal. I personally am not a fan of doing phone sessions just because I am such a seeing the person and what's going on. That dynamic interplay is so important to me. That being said, I think that there are a lot of clinicians who do great phone sessions and do them really well. I think it's provide the best level of care that you can. And if a phone call is what needs to happen, then provide the phone call.
Awesome. That was really helpful. I think that addressed the question. She meant video over phone or computer, but I think you perfectly addressed that as well. So thank you, Grace. Any last questions? We're going to wrap up here in a couple of minutes. I may have missed some that came through the chat, so if you have any additional questions and you want them to get flagged, I'd recommend the Q&A section because the chat got a little bit blown up. But I think that covered most of the questions that were asked. So thank you so much, Erika.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, that you're welcome to reach out to me. If you have via email, if you're feeling like, oh, I really need an answer and I can do my best to answer it for you. Again, consultation is really key right now.
Awesome. Well, that is greatly appreciated. And I think we'll wrap up here. So thank you so much, Erika. Again, I'll be providing all of this information over email, the recording. And I also can provide Erika's email if you're comfortable with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I get hit up, you can become very popular, I'm sure, after this webinar.
That's totally fine.
And you can also reach out to provider@modernhealth.com as well with any additional questions. And yes, we'll all be in touch. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Wishing you a safe and healthy time in quarantine.
Yes, thank you all for attending and for your very thoughtful, wonderful questions. I really appreciated it.